This is part 3 of the FEMA Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program Planning Grants webinar. Your presenter is Stephen Randolph with FEMA Region 10.
So in the end, there are deliverables, there are tasks, and there are schedules. The deliverables is, as we talked about, a FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan. The tasks are the tasks that you have laid out to implement the various stages of the planning process. And the schedule is how long it's going to take to do each one of those tasks. And again, those tasks are the organizing, reviewing, getting your planning team together, reviewing the existing planning information that's out there, determining priorities, looking at your risk assessment, developing your mitigation strategies, developing additional risk information if you need it, developing mitigation strategies, the public adoption process, and over it all is your public engagement process. And so you need to schedule enough time to do each one of those things, okay? This is just a great Gantt chart showing an actual hazard mitigation planning process timeline. So now we're to a very important part called the cost estimate budget. And I'm going to immediately go to the next slide. You develop a task-related, since we've just been talking about your tasks, you develop a task-related budget. How much is it going to cost to do each one of those different phases of the planning process? And what's involved in those costs is for each task, is there travel cost? Is there going to be contractual expenses? Are you going to be providing staff time, which often, as I said, is the match, but if you don't include that staff time in your budget, it doesn't get to be counted as match, even though FEMA is not paying for it. That's how you get it counted as match, is by putting it in the budget. So for each one of those, project management, hazard inventory, review, and summary of the existing plans, you'll have a little mini budget for each one of those tasks, okay? And then you roll up all those mini budgets into a consolidated cost. We call it the Office of Management and Budget SF424A non-construction budget format, which has things like personnel, fringe, travel, other, contractual, supplies. Those are the overall broad categories. So from each one of the sub-budgets that you develop for each one of those tasks, you roll up the personnel costs, the travel costs, the contractual costs from each one of those into an overall table, and it is this table that you put into eGrants. The task budgets you put in as an upload to eGrants as documentation to support your budget, okay? I'm going to go back a couple slides. I apologize for that, but I wanted, since we were talking about tasks in the hazard mitigation planning process, I thought it was appropriate to talk about the budget at that point in time too. So again, just as a recap, the budget provides the cost for the activity. You identify contractor costs, project management costs, costs of the team participating, the various planning team members participating in the process. You document sources for the estimated costs. You include printing, translation services, supplies. Sometimes meeting halls have to be rented that are not owned by the tribe. If that's the case, you have to do that as well. And by all means, count whatever you're going to do, include whatever you're going to provide as your tribal match to the grant. Those expenses must be included in the budget in order to be eligible as match, okay? And again, we do the task-related budget, so there's like a mini budget established for each one of those cost estimates. So project management over there at $6,800, that $6,800 includes tribal salaries and fringe, okay? For the hazard inventory, in this particular situation, it includes a little bit of tribal hazard staff and fringe, but it also includes a contractor who prepared a detailed risk assessment and put it in a GIS format for the tribe. Okay, and then again, you roll up the little mini budgets for each one of those tasks to an overall consolidated cost budget, and that is the budget you put into eGrants. The mini budgets by task, you type up, you have a spreadsheet, you do a budget narrative explaining all of those, and you upload those into eGrants as attachments. You don't put them into the body of the eGrant sub-application. And we said the magic word budget narrative. For every budget, you need a budget narrative, which describes what you're proposing to do at each one of the tasks. And you also are going to talk about the travel expenses, the training expenses that you think will be identified, estimated costs. You're going to be looking at including the salary and fringe rate for the tribal staff that will be participating, whether you count them as match or whether they're being charged to the FEMA side of the grant funds. Looks at donated match. Again, as I noted, tribal staff, tribal board members, and planning team members that are that are not paid by tribal general funds, that is actually in-kind match that you get to count. You have to document it on a per-hour basis, but it's worth it to count toward your match. This is some examples of budget and budget narratives. And we're going to talk about pre-award costs here for just a minute. So pre-award costs are anything that you incur between October 1st of 2018, developing your project sub-application, and 2019, probably mid-summer of 2019, when you get your award. And for planning grants, it's a whole lot more simple. So, number one, preparing and submitting the application, the sub-application for the plan, as well as for the overall grant application, which, as I said, is pretty simple. But the sub-application is where you're going to be spending 95% of your time. There's a planning activity 3, which is looking at prior planning activities and identifying some priorities to be included in the scope of work. That level of activity can be charged to pre-award costs. You can't start doing the hazard mitigation plan itself beyond that. You can't start working on the risk assessment. You can't start developing a vulnerability analysis. But up to step 3 in that scope of work of planning tasks, where you're looking at the existing planning plans that have been developed, and you're looking at other reports and the like, and you're trying to decide what you want to do in your scope of work. So you're helping to write the scope of work. Those activities can be charged to the grant as a pre-award cost, as long as they occur after October 1 of 2018. Attending planning training, that's also an eligible pre-award cost. That includes travel, etc. And you can just say, hey, all of our pre-award costs are going to be our match. That's fine. Most tribes don't do that. They simply identify the pre-award costs as individual cost line items. So you'll have a pre-award salaries and you'll have a post-award salaries. You have a pre-award fringe, you'll have a post-award fringe. You'll have a pre-award travel for training and a post-award travel. You make an estimate, by the way, of pre-award costs at the time you submit your budget and your sub-application. As the time you put it into eGrants, you make an estimate. We have found that oftentimes that changes. There may be more expenses. Maybe there's a planning workshop that you didn't even know about when you wrote that planning sub-application, and lo and behold, here in April of 2019, you want to send your staff to that, but that wasn't included in the original budget as a pre-award cost. Just contact us. Let us know. We can give you a verbal approval. We can also send back your budget in eGrants for you to revise and include those travel expenses as pre-award costs, even though they weren't originally in the cost estimate. As long as they're done prior to award, we can do that. Okay, and then at the time we issue the award, that's giving the formal FEMA approval of all of your pre-award costs, which for those of you who are familiar with 2 CFR 200, that is the financial guidance for all federal grants. pre-award costs have to be pre-approved by the federal agency. And so we issue that approval at the time of award. Generally, FEMA will pay 75%, up to 75%. So PDM is normally a 75-25 cost share. The tribal match would be 25%. But many tribes qualify as small and impoverished communities and therefore are eligible for a 90 federal share, 10% tribal cost share. Small and impoverished is 3,000 or more people within your reservation boundaries, economically disadvantaged so that the per capita income does not exceed 80% of the national per capita income, and an unemployment rate that exceeds by 1 percentage point the national unemployment rate. We've discovered that most tribes have better resources than we do for finding out that kind of information. That needs to be documented, put in a little report, uploaded as an attachment in eGrants if you're going to ask for 90-10 cost share. Very important. You have to ask for it. You have to justify it. You have to give us those figures of what is the population, what is the average per capita income, and what is the unemployment rate, and why does it meet those criteria. Okay, potential match sources. There's a great Hazard Mitigation Assistance cost share guide. There's a link to it down at the bottom of the page. We talked about a match commitment letter is required from the tribal board or executive. You know, that letter doesn't have to say, we're going to provide $5,000 from the general fund. We're going to get $2,746 from the American Red Cross volunteers. You know, it doesn't have to say that. It just has to say, we're going to meet the match, and if we don't have in-kind match, we're going to meet it out of tribal staff resources that we're donating to the effort. We pay their salaries. That's a cash match from the tribe. That's good. That's all we need to have. If you're doing in-kind donations, you just need to track them very carefully, the number of hours, the dates that they occurred. The hourly rate will be changed by the person. So, for example, if you had a lawyer from the tribe that was participating on the planning team as just a planning team member, he would only be able to charge, you know, whatever rate that you might have for your hazard mitigation planner, or you may just establish it's a flat $25 an hour for all members of the planning team to participate. But if, on the other hand, that attorney that is a tribal member, or maybe not a tribal member, is donating his or her time to actually review documents from a legal perspective for inclusion in the hazard mitigation plan, you know, something where they're doing lawyer stuff, then they can charge their hourly rate, and that can be counted as in-kind match. Okay, enough of that. Possible federal funds for cost share, very, very important for tribes. Most Bureau of, if not all, Bureau of Indian Affairs funding, HUD Community Development Block Grants, and Indian Health Services funds are all eligible federally provided funds that can be used as match to PDM. Most other federal grant programs cannot be used as match to PDM, and PDM cannot be used as match to other federal grant programs. But for tribes, you have these three special, usually fairly large funding streams that can be used for match if you need it. Management costs. Okay, so management costs are available for all PDM grants. For tribes, this gets a little confusing, especially if all you're doing is a new hazard mitigation plan and a plan update, okay? So imagine this, you have a planning sub-application, but you also get to charge indirect for the tribal-related staff time, small contracts, travel, supplies, etc., that are covered by your indirect cost rate program. And the only way that's effective to do this is through FEMA's management costs. So management costs are administrative expenses for financial management of the overall grant. Several tribes here recently had both planning sub-applications as well as project sub-applications, okay? So there's multiple sub-applications attached to the grant. But the management cost is a separate sub-application. It's separate from the planning sub-application, and it's not the same as the grant application. It's a separate MC sub-application that is filled out and is uploaded into the grant application. Many tribes just ask for the financial management part of it, the processing of vendor invoices, quarterly reporting, reimbursement drawdowns, etc. But we have determined, and we've made a policy here in FEMA Region 10, can't speak for other FEMA regional offices, that we know that the indirect cost rate for many tribes is high. 35 to 45% is not unusual. We will not pay indirect costs as part of a standard planning sub-application budget, but we will pay indirect costs through the management costs budget. The management cost is capped at 10%. That's not a 10% indirect cost rate. That's just saying that you calculate your indirect costs, and up to 10% of your total grant application you can put in that management cost budget as indirect cost rate recovery. I'll give you an example. You have $100,000 worth of expenses that you can claim indirect on. That's $43,000 of indirect that you would normally claim if it was BIA. Can't do that with FEMA, but we say you can claim 10%. 10% of $100,000 is $10,000. So out of that $43,000 of indirect costs that you could normally charge to a grant, you can recover $10,000 of that $43,000, and the other $33,000 is unrecovered indirect costs. Unrecovered indirect costs cannot be used as match. We've gone through that several times. This has been vetted through the highest level of FEMA Hazard Mitigation Management at headquarters and the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. So anyway, that's something very important. You won't get indirect costs if you don't ask for them in your management cost grant, okay? So it's a management cost sub-application. So please, please, please think about that. And please realize that's a separate sub-application from your planning sub-application. And both of those sub-applications roll up into your grant application. Here's a whole bunch more on indirect costs that I just explained. So I think that I won't go back over that because it's pretty self-evident. But I wanted to have this information in here for your future reference. So it's quite a bit of detail. Okay, and with that we come to the end of the presentation about scopes of work and budgets and hazard mitigation planning in general. Several of these are for if you're doing projects. So if you're doing projects and this is the first time you've taken one of the webinars and you missed the project webinar last year, it will be available as a recorded document and the slides, so you can review the slides and listen to the recording and learn all about project applications. And in closing, this is our new FEMA Region 10 Hazard Mitigation Assistance shared website. Please email us if you have questions afterwards that we haven't addressed. You can email us there. We also have the opportunity of holding a conference call technical assistance visit that we schedule with the tribe. So we're really low staffed, so we have to kind of go through this portal, but we will be responsive in getting back to you. I hope that the material is useful for you. We are very grateful that the tribes across the country, especially in our own home region here, are so interested in promoting resiliency for their own communities, doing hazard mitigation planning, applying for project funds to implement projects that come out of the hazard mitigation planning process. I will tell you that the tribes in our region in particular have truly been leaders in climate change adaptation planning, and we celebrate the success and leadership that the tribes here have provided and we're here to help. Thank you.